Another day, another joke. This one's pretty straightforward. Why did the chicken cross the road? To get to the other side. I know you love it. Let's move on. U.S. moves from isolationism. Key concept for today. Explain why FDR's foreign policy actions suggest he does not take a neutral stance in the beginning of World War II, even though the United States proclaims neutrality. Key vocabulary for today, everything is new with the exception of isolationism. That takes us back to the end of World War I. Look at that before moving forward. So our video today begins with isolationism, and that takes us back to the end of World War I, when we adopt, or the United States adopts the policy of isolationism. And that is that we're going to be concerned with our own country. That's where our focus is going to be. We're not going to get involved in other people's or other nations' affairs, like war. And it appears to work really well. In the 1920s, we experienced an economic boom. Unfortunately, the United States goes into a Great Depression afterward. And then we get the beginning of Hitler's rise to power. So the question then becomes, how should the United States react? And that starts with where the American people are and what they're experiencing. And in the 1930s, as already mentioned, the Great Depression is happening, and the people do not want to change their focus. They want their focus to remain on themselves, figure out the problem that the United States has immediately in front of it, and that is solving the economic woes. And the people are not interested in going beyond that or dealing with somebody like Hitler in Europe. Okay, so Europe did not matter to the American people. What did matter was solving the Great Depression. This does create a problem for FDR because FDR knows Hitler is a major problem. Because the United States people do not want to get involved in Europe, FDR has a choice to make. Now keep in mind, Hitler is just coming to power in Europe, so it's not like he's at war already, but in the mid-1930s, FDR has to start making choices. Do you become involved, or do you take a stance on Germany, or do you keep your focus in the United States on the Great Depression? FDR decides to choose with taking the stance of the people and focusing on the Great Depression. After all, FDR in the 1930s is trying to get his New Deal programs passed. By getting involved in Europe or taking a stance in Europe, that would create, that would go against what the people wanted and put his presidency at risk. So in the 1930s, before World War II even technically begins, the United States is going to take a stance of neutrality. So in the mid-1930s, we have the beginning of what are called the Neutrality Acts. The United States is not planning on getting into war, does not want to get into a war, even though FDR thinks Hitler is going to be a big, big problem. So we come up with different policies that show that we have a stance of being neutral, but don't allow us from interacting with other countries or trading with other countries. What we see is in 1935, we have a Neutrality Act that talks about the sale of arms. It's an act that says that if a nation is at war, then we will not trade arms with them. Okay? And this happens because Italy invades Ethiopia. However, it's just about trading arms or weapons. It's not about all trade. The second one that we see, Neutrality Act that we see, is one that has an idea behind it between cash and carry. It starts in 1937, it's revised in 1939, but it's called the cash and carry. And that is, we are willing to do trade with countries who are at war, but we have to be paid in cash for these goods, and the goods have to be transported by the nation that we are trading with. those are the two key neutrality acts that we're going to take a look at. There are other acts that follow, and maybe you can make an argument that they still are neutrality acts, and I'll share with you how that would be the case. But the next act that is a big one is the Lend-Lease Act. And part of the reason that's a big deal is because this occurs in 1940. Now you should have read the definition of it or what it was in the key vocabulary earlier in the video. But the reason why this is a big deal is because in 1940 World War II has begun and we are not trading with any of the Axis powers. However, we are still willing to do trade with those fighting the Axis powers, which would include a country like Great Britain. And that is exactly what we're doing with the Lend-Lease Act. We are willing to help out those countries that could help protect us, or we're willing to help out those countries fighting against a country or countries like Germany and Italy who could be potential threats to the United States. Finally, the Atlantic Charter is what we're going to close on here. And the Atlantic Charter, the man on the right of your screen there is Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Britain in 1941. And he and Roosevelt get together and they basically talk about how the United States will do whatever it can to help Great Britain while World War II is happening, except go to war. Right, and for the United States, this is a pretty big deal for FDR in the sense that he is trying his best to stay neutral while in the eyes of the American people he's trying his best not to go to war, but he understands the grave danger that any country is in with Hitler becoming more and more powerful. Fortunately for FDR's presidency, the decision to go to war is basically going to be made for him, and you guys know why that is. It's because Japan attacks Pearl Harbor at the very end of 1941, which then swings society's viewpoint on whether or not we should go to war. And at that point, undoubtedly, the answer is yes, the United States should go to war. We'll see you next time.